Okay, well, again, my name is Jeff Andrews. Thanks for everybody being here and taking some of your Christmas shopping time out before the big storm that's going to hit us. So if anybody hasn't gotten me my Christmas present, you only got about 6 or 8 to go shopping before they close the roads. Yeah, so we have the state of Virginia through Bob and Anthony Grimes and Matt Connor here today to talk about their experience in using RecCap. And that state, Virginia, has used RecCap for a period of years. So they have a ton of experience with it. We also are bringing with us Mary Colbert of Get Help Inc. and Tony Greco. What are you doing here, Tony? You're supposed to be on vacation in Mexico. Okay, well, Tony dragged himself away from the pool, apparently, and is going to also talk. And guys, anybody that attempted to try to get onboarded with RecCap earlier, when it was, let's say last spring, it's night and day now. We've got, as opposed to the somewhat limited resources we had up until Get Help Inc. Bought ROI's intellectual property rights, I think sometime in June or thereabouts. So now it literally is like night and day. We've got tremendous support from Get Help Inc. to make sure that everything gets up running quickly and properly. So with that, I think I'd like to turn it over to perhaps Anthony Grimes to talk about all things RecCap related in the state of Virginia.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Jeff. And, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Anthony Grimes, and I serve as the Executive Director for the Virginia Association of Recovery Residences. And I know that our group here today is the Recovery Residence Providers in Michigan. And so a little bit about myself. I'm a person in long-term recovery from substance use disorders, and I'm a former recovery residence operator. As a matter of fact, the last recovery house that I overdosed in was the first one I bought when I returned home from incarceration and began my recovery journey. And so recovery housing is very near and dear to my heart. And, Virginia made the decision in 2019 when they decided to hire their first paid executive director when they had some funding, and they decided to hire me. And, with that decision came, I had to essentially write my own job description because nobody knew what I was supposed to be doing. And certainly we all in this space have been faced with some limited resources on how we can better our recovery landscape. And so as a recovery residence operator, one of the things I always struggled with was I wanted to be able to evidently show state agencies and legislators and individuals who may be not familiar with our space, why recovery housing was so important to the continuum of care, right, as we battle substance use disorder in all of our communities. And one of the things, the tactics that we did for advocacy was we would march success stories down into the General Assembly, and we would have individuals tell their story. And finally a legislator pulled me aside. He said, "Hey, let me tell you something here." He said, "These stories are great and they impact us on the day that you tell them." He said, "But if you can get us some data, if you can provide us with some data that you can circulate in a one-pager that show the effectiveness of what you're doing, how it impacts our communities and how it impacts the state as a whole, and essentially how you save us money, then we can get behind funding you." And so I had this wide-eyed idea that we would implement the RecCap. Now Jeff won't say this, but most of the other directors across the country thought I was insane and I'd be fired within 6 months, because how am I ever going to get all of Virginia's recovery housing operators to buy into using this system? And I can't tell you how we did that because I'm not sure, but I knew that we had about 8 or 10 of our providers. We only had about 12 at the time. Who really believed in what they were doing. They were a member of VAR because they felt that it was important to meet a standard, right? A minimum level of quality care for the individuals who they were serving. And some of our providers had always wanted to have some of their own data, but they just never had a way to collect it. They didn't know what system they should use, whether it was evidence-based or not, whether it was treatment focused instead of recovery focused, or exactly how did they go about showing this data, right? And so I came across the RECCAP. And, my relationship with John Lehman was built from there. And then later I began to become great friends with Tony Greco and the Get Help team. And what I'm here to tell you today is that what I'm about to tell you is not false. It sounds like a dream for recovery house providers who have always felt, because I always felt as a recovery house provider, undervalued, that the state didn't care about me. And they certainly didn't care about the people I was serving, because they were spending millions of dollars for treatment and other aspects to help individuals. But what we know is that in this country, we have spent 90% of our funding on the first 30 days of an individual's journey. And then the next 5 years, we just will devote 8 to 10% of our resources to that, when the evidence-based science says that we need to induce people into long-term recovery. And that's how we're going to fight opioid use disorder and substance use disorder all throughout our communities. And so then began the RECCAP. And what we did was we implemented the RECCAP. And our recovery housing operators, they didn't know what was going to come of this. And I couldn't guarantee them that I would be able to take this data to legislators and we would be able to form this coalition to help support the people they were supporting. But I told them I believe that we could do it. I believe if we implemented this system and we showed our effectiveness through evidence-based science, I believe the state would respond. And they trusted me on that. And when they implemented this platform, one of the things that we realized, for instance, was that 80% of the people we were serving was Caucasian and only 20% were from minority populations. And that caught my eye. I wanted to know why that was. And so in 2020, we sent out a blind email to all 164 legislators across the state, asking them to carry a budget amendment for us. One legislator responded. If she was in the last year of her term, she had served for 20 years in the legislature. She carried that budget amendment and got it for us for $250,000. And I'm here to tell you that with Get Help and ROI culminating these numbers, we were able to show that with $250,000 going to VAR to distribute for indigent bed support for individuals who couldn't afford accessing a recovery house, that those numbers went to 70-30. In the second year, in 2021, they increased that $250,000 to $500,000, and we saw another 8% increase in those numbers. And then I'm here to tell you, 6 months later, in the 2021 special session, our Virginia state legislature delegated $10 million directly to VAR, $10 million. And when we began deploying that ARPA funding to recovery housing, those numbers went to 55%, 45%. So what it told us was that through data, we could show that minority populations, their biggest barrier to accessing a quality recovery residence was a funding barrier. Additionally, we were able to show the need for more reentry programs. We were able to show the need for more rural area supports, right? And it's easy to say, well, everybody knows this, but legislators don't want to hear what you know. They want to see on paper what you can show them through evidence-based science. And so I'm here to tell you all today that if you're wondering what the why is for all of this implementation of RECCAP, I'm here to tell you it's not an outcomes measurement tool. Contrary to popular belief, you do get outcomes metrics that are what we show in our advocacy work. But the most important thing to know about this platform is that it is a recovery support service delivery tool. And what I mean by that is as a recovery house provider, I would always say, well, this guy did well because he came in, he got a job. 3 months later, he got a better job. He got a sponsor. He went to meetings. He worked on his mental health. He did all these things, right? But I couldn't show that the recovery resident setting and the peers in that setting were a result of this growth for this individual. What the RECCAP does is it tracks the individual's journey, not just at intervals of taking a RECCAP assessment. It tracks what happens in between them, how we as the recovery residence provider are supporting this individual, connecting them to resources outside of the recovery residence, holding them accountable to what they say they wanted to do when they came in the door. And I'm here to tell you today that by doing all of these different things and really having the belief that we can make history right here in Michigan, right? Because I'm here to tell you, we've made history here in Virginia. The work that VAR has done over the last 3 years has changed the way our governor views recovery and recovery support service. And more importantly, the resources that should be devoted, not just to treatment in the acute phase, but in long-term recovery. We need to build a continuum of care, a recovery-oriented system of care that doesn't leave anybody behind, regardless of ability to pay, and more importantly, supports people to build a solid foundation in their own recovery journey. And I'm here to tell you today that if we can all come together and believe in this and do this together, because we're not the affiliate who's trying to tell you what to do. We're trying to tell you, take our hand in hand, and let's walk this journey together. And I believe that if we do this, I will personally come down to Michigan and advocate with your General Assembly, with your legislators. Jeff claims he can get me in front of the governor. I'm gonna hold him to that. Let's get some data and let's go make history right here in Michigan. So it's just a pleasure to be on the call with you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anthony. And Virginia's about a year in front of us in terms of really effective advocacy with their legislature. And it starts, as Anthony said, with discussing with your state agency folks. And what Anthony was talking about was exactly what I was hearing from the state of Michigan, BP HASA folks and the OROX folks. It's like, show me the data. Show me something in writing that shows that we're working and it makes sense. And I think that data is going to show that. And anyway, so thank you so much, Anthony, for kind of describing why it's in everybody's best interest to use the RECCAP system. So with that, I would invite anybody from Get Help Inc. To talk about what's happening with the transition from ROI to Get Help Inc.
Do you want to go or do you want me to go?
Yeah, you can go. I'll just say real quick, just so everybody here, you know, I echo everything that Anthony just talked about. I mean, this has been such the inspiring part of the journey. A little over a year ago, John Lehman and I did a presentation at the MARR conference, and at that point, we said we knew that we were going to work together one way or another, and began a deep conversation about what it means. So I think if there's one thing that I would want everybody here to know as far as who Get Help is and what we are, the team here, I can speak for myself and have permission to speak for most of us here. I am also a person in long-term recovery, deeply committed to the mission of what we're all doing here. Not to go too far back, but my mom and dad met in an AA meeting. And I tell people I've been trying to get people in help and treatment one way or another since I was 7 years old. You know, my mom unfortunately didn't stay sober then when they met. And then as a result of everything in my life, ended up coming into recovery at 17 years old and have been here ever since. Worked my way through school, got my doctorate in clinical psychology, only to realize that it was just as difficult for a psychologist to find help for people as it was for a 7-year-old. And that was really the origin of starting Get Help. You know, we started out working with some NAR affiliates really closely, led to a deep engagement with NAR and working on the national registry for recovery houses, which then led to the relationship that we started to build with John Lehman and Jessica and ROI, and having a conversation with Anthony and Virginia about some of the challenges that we like to call opportunities that existed with using RECCAP, and how powerful that would be when also connected to and collaborating with, you know, a registry and ability for people to be able to find recovery residences regardless of who they are and where they are. And so we've been deeply committed, you know, both for just fundamental philosophical reasons and behind the tools and the research and overall showing the rest of the world that this is a viable pathway for recovery, you know, and that's really our commitment. And so we've done everything that we can on our end from a technology and supporting the technology perspective. I tell people all the time, we're not a technology company, we're a relationship company. We're here to build relationships with all of you, and to support the relationships that are being built, you know, now between Michigan and Virginia and ROI and all of us here. So, you know, what we are really focusing on here is providing the human capital to support this amazing tool. And so with that, I want to just give you, a quick, some of the folks here that you'll continue to have interaction with. Mary Colbert is the director of our business development here, enrollment and engagement. Michael McDermott, Gene Deathridge here. These are folks who are deeply committed from the Get Help side, and we work hand in hand, hand in glove with Jessica Best, who heads up ROI, and with Dr. Best, very closely with those folks. So it was important for me to be here and to see all of you, but to give you this sense of the support that is behind all of this now. Mary?
I think you handled everything other than Tyler Jennings is also here. He's our director of product.
Is he
Yeah,
here?
no,
I
you
couldn't see
can't see him.
Yeah, okay.
And I think, yeah, the one thing I had a very lively and engaging conversation with Jeff yesterday. And I think the most important thing I want to impart is that it is my understanding that the RECAP tool is an amazing tool. And it is my understanding there's been some fits and starts in terms of rollouts and the ability to have MARR be able to fully engage with this tool. And it is our collective commitment with Jessica and John Lehman that such a brilliant tool can be fully rolled out and executed for your youth for all the reasons that Anthony advised. And so it was just important that you know that we are partnering with MARR to take what we talk a lot about, which is a cottage industry that we all know works. We all know recovery residences are imperative, critical in the recovery journey. And what does it look like when we all get together and bring the professional qualities that we all know exist in this landscape? What does it look like when we partner together, to take us to the next level and to show the efficacy of what we do? And it's through the RECAP tool. I think that we get there, and Anthony described that so well. So I just wanted to be here to let you know that in partnering with Jessica and John and their excellence, and with VAR, who has been absolutely amazing in the generosity of their time and spirit in supporting Get Help and MARR, that I just want you to know we're deeply committed to the success of Michigan, because you're super important as we work with RECAP and are able to validate what we all know is the important work that we do. So that's all I want you to know. Oh, look at that. And John is here as well.
John is here. Yes. Hi, John.
Thank you.
Hey, Tony. Hey, Mary. Good to see you both.
Good to see you. That's great.
Hi, John.
Hey, I think I heard Jeffrey. Is
It
that
was.
Jeffrey?
Good to see you again, kid.
Oh, there you are. I see you. How are you?
Good.
Good. Well, if I don't get to say it later, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and a safe and exciting New Year to all of you. I'll be here to support as best I can through the next couple of quarters as we roll this out successfully in Michigan.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, John.
So,
back to you, Mr. Van Treese.
Back to me. Okay. So one of the things, we just had a meeting last week. Jessica and Dr. Best came to Michigan and met with people in Lansing. And let me tell you, I can't tell you how important it was to have data to share with the state of Michigan. It all comes down to, we need to have data. It's kind of like saying, I had some background in banking and saying, I need to have a credit score associated with somebody to figure out what their relative strengths are and what the relative ability to repay me. So it's the same thing with trying to assess what recovery capital people have, their growth of recovery capital, and then the elimination of barriers. So with that, I think one of the things I wanted to do today was open it up for any questions, because we've got all the high-paid experts on the panel here today. So if anybody has a question about RECAP, rollout, anything like that, please raise your hand, unmute yourself, and ask a question.
Hey, can you hear me?
If it's my, oh, go ahead.
Sure, Jason.
Hey, I was just wondering, in regards to the rec cap, when you go and do an intake on a person or an individual, the initial, when you get them going and get them set up, what's the initial time commitment for me to basically input a case file?
It's an excellent question and one that I should have addressed earlier. And I'll maybe leave that to Anthony to answer. And the real question is, okay, how much time do I got to spend? Because I think Jason is probably the staff for his entity, for his recovery residence. So how much time do I have to spend in order to get somebody assessed and to go through the initial interview and to come up with an initial recovery plan?
That's a great question, Jason, and certainly, you know, I remember being certainly a 5-house operator with just me. I had level 2, so I had just had peer leaders or house managers, however you all refer to them in Michigan. So one of the things I'd be wondering is how am I going to deploy this, right? Like, I don't have a bunch of staff and I don't have the bandwidth to deploy this. I can tell you, here in Virginia, the average intake time, and I'm not talking about rec cap, I'm just talking about in general, in which somebody is going to go over the policies and procedures and documents and get those signed and kind of familiarize the individual with everything that they're signing is anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour. You know, typically just on that initial interaction. So I would say that the timeline is relatively the same, although it's sped up a little bit here because all the documents are being kind of signed in the intake portal. So it eliminates the time of having to go through and get all these things signed by an individual here. So oftentimes here, what a recovery residence will do is they'll have a paper version and they'll ask for the individual to kind of, you know, read over it, make sure that they understand what they're signing. Then they'll kind of go through it. They'll do that portion of it, get the document signed, set up the client portal. Then they'll do the initial baseline evaluation. So, you know, I would say, and Matthew and Bob can chime in, but I would say that it's still relatively in that 45 minutes to an hour between the organization getting all their policies and procedures signed, getting the client set up with their client portal and doing the baseline evaluation to get somebody enrolled into the system, as well as all their general information can still take place in that relatively 45 minutes to an hour timeline.
Thanks, Ann.
If I may, Jeff, jump in for just a quick second.
Sure.
Let me share my screen. Make sure I'm starting the right one here. And let me see if I can't maybe increase the size of what we're looking at. So this is the VAR network. So this would be data collected from all the providers that are certified recovery residences within the VAR network. But and what it does is it measures the time that was invested in evaluations, and then we can literally get down to a per client. But the average minutes per client for evaluation, which includes getting that client enrolled in the system and set up and then doing the evaluation, 72, so call it 73 minutes. Recovery planning is about 22 minutes. Maybe 22 and a half, and navigational support, which are periodic progress review sessions that occur on either weekly or bi-weekly schedule, are 18.96, so call it 19 minutes. And that's based on a fairly comprehensive number of clients who receive service delivery, from evaluations is 4,555, and recovery planning 2,414, and navigation support sessions 2631. So we've got a pretty solid basis to establish that on average, the whole kit and caboodle for delivery of MPE, measure plan engage, is about 115 minutes per client during their residency in your program.
And that is an average, Jason. And also, I just wanted to pitch in that when you start this process, it'll take a bit longer just because of the learning curve. And as you get into the groove of this, that time will increase too. And, one of the very encouraging things, when we were at the MARR conference, which I'm sure Anthony can speak to in a moment too, from his provider's perspective, is that while David and I were there presenting on some of the great data outcomes that were coming from the recovery residences and things that we hope to publish soon as evidence that we'll be able to use with different states as well. These providers were coming up to us saying, we fought you tooth and nail. We didn't want to change. This was a very scary process. We didn't like this at all whatsoever, but I can't tell you how much we love this. This has done so much for our program. We've completely redesigned how we operate because of some of the outcomes and some of the data points that they're able to view. So if that's helpful. And Anthony, if you want to touch base on that one, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jessica. And I love talking with people like Jason, right? Our recovery housing providers that are doing the work in the trenches. Because that's what makes all this data make sense for people like myself or Jeff to go advocate on behalf of you and with you for the state and to support the people who you're trying to serve. And the most important thing that it was important for me to know as a recovery housing operator, right, was that I didn't need to change anything about my program for me to utilize the rec cap. I had this initial impression that that I was going to have to change the way I do things. And I didn't really want to change the way I do things because I'm seeing what I'm doing work. I'm helping people. People are progressing. They're alumniing out. They're coming back and they're giving back, right? And so what we have found here, because it's deployed over 27 organizations currently, that all have a wide variety of models, is that everything that an organization already does fits into the confines of the rec cap. The rec cap doesn't alter your program. It just validates and shows in real time how your program is effectively helping these individuals. And I just think that's such an important piece to bring up, is that it's not going to change your program. It's actually everything that your program and that your housing structure is already doing is going to fit into this, and it's just going to validate it.
In a very uniformed approach too. Uniform data collections that we're collecting the same data set in an evidence-based structured manner to be able to present to funding sources and to states and to programs, including you, is really important as part of this process.
And that's a great point that Jessica made, because we had some organizations here, different ones that were collecting data on these different platforms that they had, whether they were homegrown or they were kind of a modified platform to try and fit recovery housing. And they would all go to the state with all this data that they had, and the state never gave them a darn dime. And the reason for that was the state wanted to see data from a variety of providers, urban, rural, different styles of programming. They wanted to see all this data collected on the same platform and presented as VAR, the state affiliate. And so, because we heard that too. Well, we have a platform and it does this and it does that. But, in order to really make historic strides and really have this unified voice, and that's the other thing it did, right? Our providers really, they didn't view each other as competition. They viewed other providers as their collaborators, right? And we were able to set up learning communities and people learning from each other about what's working, what's not working, because the ultimate goal, right, is to serve the individual with a substance use disorder that's seeking services, right? That's why I'm in the space, and I'm sure that's why all of you all are in the space. That's why we get up and do what we do, because I don't see anybody on this call here who's, a billionaire. If you were, you wouldn't be on this call with us today, right? So you obviously have a passion and a mission-centric heart to do this style of work. And so that unified voice, right? Through data, we can tell this unified story that individuals of different minorities, different socioeconomic backgrounds, right? That when they come into recovery housing, right, that we play such a vital role in supporting them and kind of what we call launching them into their recovery, where they become productive, tax-paying members of society once again.
I'm gonna, if I can, I'm gonna jump in again real quick to let the data tell its story. So all of us in the recovery housing sector are familiar with doing intakes where the client comes in and they have needs that are beyond our ability to service. They have a need to connect with mental health services and primary health care and a host of professional service providers within the community. And that's been true for the last 50 years. It's going to be true for the next 50 years. And what we in the recovery housing sector do, we know who we're comfortable making referral of clients to. We know which ones are the good guys, which ones are the ones that are scam artists, et cetera. And this guy comes in, we help evaluate the need, and then we make the connection and assertively link the client to that service provider. But we got no data to show that we do that. We can tell the story. We can get the client to stand up on stage and tell the wonderful story of all the support and help that they got from the provider, but we don't have any data. And the system automatically collects that. So what it's doing is it's saying, here at the first evaluation, the baseline, here are all of the professional service needs, and they are alcohol service, drug treatment, employment service, which would be formal, the aptitude testing, vocational training, et cetera, professional service, family relations and counseling, housing support service, mental health care, primary health care, and then other specialists. An example of that might be a dentist. And when they came through the front door, that's that first set of columns over here, which is time one or T1 or evaluation one. And these are clients that are asking for help to get connected to those services. And then 45 days later, they complete a follow-up evaluation. And we know that the number of individuals that are requesting continued support from those professional providers has significantly dropped, and again dropped more at the third follow-up and the fourth and the fifth, and by the point they get to a year out, now there's very limited requests for professional services, and the ones that are requested generally are mental health and primary health and other specialists. So we are able to document for the state, for the MARR, the network that certifies us, and for family members that are making decisions as to where they're going to place their loved one, et cetera, that we have a process that we do this and that it's effective. And then we're able to tie all of that back to growth and recovery capital as a result of those service connections. And so here's what they look like when they came in. On an average at T1 or baseline, a RCI score of 42.22, and RCI is simply Recovery Capital Index, which is the combination or the sum of both negative capital and positive capital that are measured by the RECCAP. So they, on average, in the BARR network, over the entire time that BARR has been implementing the system, the average at baseline is 42.22. And then at the first follow-up, which is at 45 days, it's now grown to 70.14 because we have addressed those unmet service needs and a series of barriers that also are part of negative capital measures. And they've probably improved some metrics as well. And then by the second follow-up, which is T3, they're at 80.2 and then 82.08, 83.24, and 86.13. So we're able to demonstrate that the individuals that come through the front door have significant barriers and unmet professional service needs that need to get addressed, that we help connect them to those and resolve those. And as a result, the recovery capital has grown and has been sustained. And what we also know from the science is that individuals that have high recovery capital with low or high positive capital with low negative capital are the individuals most likely to sustain recovery long term. So that's the goal. The goal is to build recovery capital and sustain it. So all of this is part of the dashboards that exist for the BARR network, that will exist for the MARR network, but then you also have provider level where you get to look at just your program. And then you can even drill out further to look at I have 4 navigators that have gone through training and are engaged in delivery of this structured recovery support service known as Measure, Plan, Engage. And I can look and see what outcomes are being produced by the recovery plans and the support that those individual navigators are delivering to those clients. And that puts me in a position of being able to really manage my recovery residents and the delivery of services that measurably enhance outcomes for clients.
Thank you, John. And while I do see that we have several people, it's good to see names as I was just going through the list, who were on calls while David and I were in Michigan. Good to see each of you again. And we're very excited to start this process with you. So thank you very much for attending this one. Anybody else have any questions? We should definitely hear from you as providers in Michigan so that we can answer any questions that you might have. It looks like Justin, you have your hand up. Oh, you're muted, Justin.
Can you hear me now? Okay, great. My name is Justin Crow. I'm the owner and operator at Vision Quest Recovery Housing in Port Huron, Michigan. And we actually currently, we have 54 beds spread over 8 houses. Okay, and we have approximately 48 residents, current residents right now. So now if this, if I were to, you know, would this only apply for new residents coming in? Or would it apply to the current 48 that we currently have now? So like, because that would be a lot of work. You see, like 48, like, you know, considering it's going to take 45 minutes to an hour per current resident. And my next question is too, is the peer leaders, we call them our house managers here, would they also be, would their metrics be intertwined? Because generally they're going to have longer periods of sobriety or recovery, and so that was just my because this is super. My intuition more recently has been telling me to seek this, and I just had a reminder to come on this meeting, and this is exactly what I was, you know, what I needed to hear today. So I'm grateful for you guys and what you guys done about Virginia, and so I'm super excited about this. So again, my questions were, is it for just new people or all the residents? And in number 2, is it for the house managers? Do they do it as well?
Okay, absolutely. And while I would be happy to share some of the tips and tricks that Virginia has rolled out with, you know, their providers too in the larger programs, I think it would be best to pass over your first question, well, both of them really, to Anthony, if you'd like to first pitch in. I know that we discussed this on a previous call, so it's great that you asked the exact same question we recently discussed as a group too. So thank you for that, Justin. Anthony, what tends to work for the larger programs as they begin to implement this?
Yeah, so I'll probably let Matthew chime in because, you know, some of you are probably going to work with Matthew and he's what I call a subject matter expert, you know. Essentially, you know, Justin, what I would recommend as I've implemented it myself is I would recommend when you first get on board with the system, you start with capturing everybody new coming in, right? That's like the starting block because we all got to start somewhere. Yes, your house managers or peer leaders, they're people, if they occupy a certified bed, then they're in the system as well, right? You know, and because you want that data as well. And then organically, as you can, start adding in the clients house by house, right? You know what I mean? And so it's kind of just a process of elimination. You know, I'm here to tell you that nobody expects you as a housing provider to wave a magic wand and you got all 48 people in the system and, you know, all these things are happening, right? Like it, you know, one thing about this is it's a process, right? And so, you know, we always like to call it a good faith effort, right? So the best way to start that effort is to start capturing everybody new coming in the door, right? Deploying the process and the system on them. And then as organically, as you get people in the system, kind of go back and we can help you implement a model, right, that works for you, given your staff bandwidth and what you have at each house. Early on, we saw a lot of staff and peer leader interaction in getting people who were already in the house who had been there for a while into the system, right, you know, house by house. And so it's really just a process of elimination. And you know, it does take a little while to get your entire existing individuals into the system. But it's not overtaxing, it's not overburdensome. And then really that's at the point, right, after you start getting these new people in, where we see the organization owners and providers like you begin to get really excited, because you begin to see all these things that Mr. Lehman was showing really start populating. And so we see they kind of start catching fire with it. And, you know, with that, Matthew probably has a few things.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Anthony. You know, I'm pretty much going to echo a lot of what Anthony said. You're going to want to roll this out on your newer residents as they come in, you know, capturing their initial baseline within that 72-hour window of intake. Although you are also going to capture your current residents. And then this is like, you know, for me, as someone that works with operators, and in this case, it might be Kelly, you know, this is where I'm going to engage with you, kind of break down what your model looks like. You know, how do you utilize your house managers? You know, what's the structure of delivery going to look like for you? Because with these current residents, we want to go ahead and get them in the system, but they'll also be good, you know, real life, real time, you know, living people to get familiarized within the system. You know, to use my house managers if I'm implementing them and capturing these baselines, to get familiar with the RecCap tool itself. You know, so short answer, you're going to want to get those new ones in on time and start, you know, fitting those, you know, data fidelity, as they'll talk about, right? Getting them in on time. And then again, just to kind of like touch on that, you know, being, you know, pragmatic as I am, and being a person in recovery, so knowing myself and my limitations, there might be resistance from those that are the current residents. You know, so how do we create a culture change within an organization that is open and willing to participate in the RecCap? And that starts with the newer residents coming in, because you know, I work with the knowledge that I already have. So if the only knowledge I have of an organization is that when I come in, you know, I take part in this RecCap and it's part of my process as a resident, then that's what I'm going to work with. You know, so there might be some resistance from those current residents, but making sure to implement it with the new ones as they come in, you know, will change that culture over time.
Thanks, Matthew. So unless anybody else has any other questions, I'll try to put in some filler. What is the cost, assuming that the state of Michigan is not going to be paying for this free, which they have for the next 2 years? What would be the cost to an individual home operator, say that's got 5 homes, to independently go contract with RecCap?
$5,700
$5,700, and that's annual?
annually, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Jeff, I also want to touch on, you know, very similar in Virginia, you know, some of your providers may be saying, well, gosh, if the state's only paying for it for 2 years, you know, what's the point, right? And so I got that as well, right? And so, you know, our providers, right? We talked early on in this talk, right, about belief and buying in and coming together, right? And I'm a big one in our NAR theme this year, which was better together, right? You know, we're better together as a community, as a state, as a recovery community, and as a nation, right? And so, like Jeff, I went out and I was only able to get the RecCap paid for by the state for 1 year when we rolled this out. And I'm here to tell you that the providers bought in. They began with the new residents. And as the state saw this data begin to populate our dashboards, like John Lehman was showing you, the state came back and said, this is going to be, we want this in place long-term in Virginia. And so they immediately paid for another 5 years upfront in one contract. And I'm here to tell you that I know Jeff and I know the state agency individuals he works with. So I would not be concerned about a 2-year timeline. I believe that this will be ongoing in Michigan. I would almost guarantee it. If I was Jeff, I would go ahead and guarantee it. So I'm gonna put a little pressure on him because that's what I like to do. But you know, honestly, this is something that I would not be concerned about only being around for a short period of time, because this tool has become so valuable in Virginia that our drug court professionals are looking at implementing it. We carried it into a jail that has a recovery program. It's going to a government entity that facilitates community-based mental health services in Chesterfield County. And so You know, as we look at some of the excellence in recovery housing bills that pass at the federal level, along with the SAMHSA directives around substance abuse block grant funding, it's becoming more evident to states that we need to be spending funding on recovery support services, and we need to be delivering metrics back to SAMHSA. And so I think with all the stars kind of aligning in this realm, that Michigan's in a perfect place.
Thanks. And Anthony, my response is, I've been practicing law for over 40 years. This will be the easiest sell I'll ever have. If I can get some data, and I get some buy-in from people, it's going to sell itself, because they're going to say, I've got a tool, it's relatively cheap, it works.
Yeah, I agree, Jeff.
Michigan has actually got issues trying to find places to put money.
Yeah, no.
Down. And so I'll guarantee this on Anthony's mortgage, that we'll get for more than worth 3, 4, 5 years out there too. So, and I'll send you the paperwork later today.
Yeah, well, I see John Lehman laughing. What he doesn't know is that if something happens to my mortgage, I'm coming to live with him, so he can laugh. You know, but also as a recovery housing provider, you know, I also want to separate ourselves from these outcomes metrics and certainly the stuff that we're talking about, which is going to lead to funding. I mean, I'm here to tell you that last month, I think we wrote $50,000 and $60,000 checks to our recovery housing provider to cover people who couldn't afford their recovery house, and they were able to scholarship them, and we tracked that money, and that was money provided by the state to MARR. So we're talking about a big impact to your organizations on being able to serve people who historically you've covered their cost out of your own pocket. You have taken a deficit on your organization in order to help these individuals. I believe that the state will start picking up that tab once we can show them this data. But I also want to make it very clear that the prime motivation for recovery housing operators to implement this is, I'm here to tell you that the numbers tell us that when this system is implemented and we deliver recovery support service tools based on the science of this model, our length of engagement numbers, our retention numbers, everything goes up. In other words, you as a recovery house provider, you buy in and you deliver this, the people who your life's mission is to set out to help, they will stay in your program longer. They will do better. And who wouldn't want to do something that benefits the people who we set out to serve in the very beginning, right? Like if we can do this and it can help us help the individuals longer and better. I mean, you know, to me as an operator, it was a no-brainer, right? Like if you're telling me if I do this right and I believe in this, and I tell you, this belief happens over time. I hoped it would, but I didn't know if I believed it. And then after we did it and we were able to follow the science and we were able to say, okay, individuals with this score typically don't make it with us for 2 weeks. Why is that? And then what can we do to combat that, right? We saw in real time people staying longer. People who normally wouldn't have made it very long in our programs began to make it longer because we knew where to deploy our resources at.
The other thing that I'd like to throw out there for consideration, because I really do appreciate anytime a provider, particularly a provider that's grossly underfunded, as is true of most recovery residences, in terms of public money, is asked to do something new and implement something that's going to require, you know, education and planning and training and just the physical time that's involved in entering data, meeting with clients and doing private surveys, et cetera. Whenever that ask is presented, it's like, oh my God, I'm already overwhelmed. I could, if I had 3 more staff, I might be able to catch up on just what I'm doing now. And you want to throw some new piece of technology at me that's going to, you know, overburden me and tax my existing system. What's important to recognize is that it's a chicken egg kind of deal. So the state's got all sorts of money that they didn't have 2 years ago, and they didn't have 5 years ago, that they now have that's coming from the federal government, earmarked for recovery support services. And the state really doesn't know what to do with that money. They don't have an infrastructure in the state where it's all set up and they know how to disperse that money, distribute that money in order to get the most bang for their buck. And what's happening is MARR is coming into Angie, the state, and saying, we've got a system. We're going to get buy-in from our existing certified recovery residents. So we're going to collect this data. And we're going to be able to demonstrate to you that by implementing this science, this evidence-based approach to peer recovery support services, we're going to measurably enhance outcomes for the population being served. And we're going to be able to provide you with clear, accurate, reliable data that supports that. And so the state buys in. Now it's in Jeffrey's hands to encourage you all to play nicely in the sandbox to get to the point where there is that data set to go back to the state and present. And what's really important here is uniform data, because sure, you all have various different technological solutions for managing your recovery residents. Some might be a simple spreadsheet, others might be more sophisticated software, but it's not uniform and it's not evidence-based. And what the state needs is uniform data, and that data has to be evidence-based in order for them to rely on it. And that's what this system is. So if we get, even if MARR is able by the end of 2023 to get 2025 of its certified members participating, the data is going to sell the state on not only extending the use of the platform, but also beginning to make other dollars available to recovery residences, like they have in Virginia for indigent bed fees, for delivery of intensive recovery support services that are peer based, and you're all going to benefit from that. So you're going to get real bottom line benefits from this over time, but it starts with a commitment and taking using the experience of other NAR affiliates like MARR and FAR and West Virginia, et cetera, to demonstrate to you all in Michigan that this is something that makes sense and that we ought to do. So
I'm going to
Jeffrey,
interrupt you for
Jason-
1 minute because we only have a
Jason-
few minutes left.
Jason has his hand up and I saw Kamisha waving her hand. I'd like to hear from them before we wrap,
Right.
if that's possible.
Yeah, I'd like to carry over as long as we need to, but I just want to give time for others to talk.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I truly appreciate, I truly appreciate the work that is being done to capture the data, to be able to take it to a state level and say, this is what's going on in Michigan. Here's all the great work that's being done. Can we please, provide, or can the state please provide us with some financial assistance? But me as an individual, as a sole owner of my business, I'm not looking for any money from the state. In fact, I've been through programs a couple of years ago when they had the SOAR grant, the State Opioid Recovery Act, and I participated in that. But one of the detriments that I found is that once you start taking the money from the state, they basically tell you how to run your business. And one of the things when I stepped away from allowing Suboxone into my house, then I could no longer participate in that grant, even though I allowed the Sublocade shot. So I guess the bad taste in my mouth is that since I'm not taking any money from the state, nor do I want to receive any funding from insurance companies or what have you. For me, I guess being told that I'm no longer going to be certified through MARR if I choose not to participate in this, it's kind of hurtful. I've looked at other certification bodies. They don't require that I keep electronic records or anything like that. My paper records are fine, and I just feel like it's a little too much. And I don't want to leave MARR as my certifying body, but I just if you look at the time that it's going to take, that's with just for me, it's going to be close to 300 hours a year, and I just don't I don't have that time.
I want to speak
If
to.
I could
hang on a second.
address that, let me address that for a moment. Tony.
Jeff, can I speak to that for just a second? Jason, you are exactly the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing here. I need programs like yours to not be in the shadows and to be able to have outcomes and have measurements and show what the efficacy is of programs that might not be participating in other programs, whether it be medication assisted treatment, whether it be other various kind of things. So, I don't think that this is just a matter of funding and receiving funding from government and agencies and all of that. I think that it is also in part, and just as important as far as I'm concerned, showing the outcomes at a standard and level of programs that are doing what it is that your program is doing, for example. So I'd be happy to talk with you one-on-one on this and be able to have deeper conversation around it. But I think that there is much more when we start talking about what different programs are doing, and the way that they're operating, and being able to show the same level of, or in some cases, it may be better outcomes, and maybe we don't know. Right. And right now there's this big gap in what we know about these kind of programs, and there's not enough research supported by it. So this is a big conversation that I'm in outside of this meeting and outside of this group, and would love to be able to talk to you on that level, because I really am passionate about wanting to be able to show that too. Right. For a lot of programs, they are stuck in the funding stream. So this is a funding thing. We got to show that too.
And yeah, and to Tony's point, Jason, I would just tell you that in Virginia, right, you're not bound to all that stuff because you receive funding for your, and I know you're taking in individuals who can't pay, because every provider in the country does, right? You're helping people. Here in Virginia, we take on the burden of all the government stuff. And I'm here to tell you today that we don't impose sanctions and do all this stuff that says, well, now that you're getting this money, we need you to do this. The only requirement here to be eligible for funding is to be utilizing the rec cap. And the reason for that is because we track the grant dollars that we distribute to you. Our money comes to MARR. You're not contracting with the state agency or with the federal government or anybody else. Your only agreement is with us that, hey, you're a certified provider, you're helping people, you're using the rec cap, and then we allocate the money to you. And then essentially it's tracked in the system because, as you enroll clients, you're assigning them that they're on grant funding, and then we're paying you based off of the reports and stuff. But what that does is it allows us to show the effectiveness of the funding, that, hey, Jason's program, on all the people that he awarded scholarships to, right, this is how they did. And so it's not about whether your program accepts this or accepts that. If you're a certified provider, you don't have to deal with all that stuff. And that's the model that I'm working with Jeff to implement.
And to piggyback on that real quick, and I know we're over time, but I just want to make this point. I said it kind of casually. I mean, I'm a psychologist is my background. I've been in recovery. I'm just going to say it very clearly here, 27 years, right? This is the closest that I've been able to see as a way to be able to begin to quantify the success of what it is people like us have been doing for 27 years. Right. And be able to show that to other places and inform laws, inform legislature, inform all of these people, so that the rules that you're bound to, some of these rules that you just discussed, Jason, that we start to have data to be able to speak to some of those points. Right now, it doesn't exist. So we need people like you and your programs participating so that we have that. And that's why I like I said, one-on-one, I'm willing to do a deep dive on what is it going to take in order to make that a reality.
Well, somebody had said earlier, just having the new people, just work on the new individual that comes in home. You have one new person that came in next week. That's the person you work with. Work on new individuals, which would make a big difference. MARR got some funding as well to assist with laptops. So we're thinking it's easier maybe to do this process by having a laptop at each location. So MARR is going to reimburse all the operators for every laptop up to $300 per home. We just need the receipt and stuff, and we can reimburse you for that expense. And this is going to allow your residents to add their own data. When they get home, they can put in their own information as well, which will help keep things, simplify things hopefully a little bit more.
That's a good point, Catherine. And Jason, the one thing I was going to add is that this is a tool. Forget about the funding. Put that totally aside, okay? This is a tool that's going to allow you to get better information on the individual's recovery journey, and is going to give you a better assessment of what you're doing that works, and maybe there's some things that could be improved a little bit in the program. So it's going to be beneficial to the program. It's going to be not really any, it's not going to require you to hire an extra staff person. It's going to be something that's a tool that will allow you to, using the same amount of time that you're using right now, basically, to come up with a better result for both the individual, or a better result for your program. And, from a collective point of view, a better result for all of the MARR recovery residence operators in the state of Michigan, including you. So that's my 10 cents, Jason. And one more thing. If somebody really, let's say they get a level 1 home where you don't have any staff at all, it's just a group of them. At that point, you can ask for an annual exemption to the MARR certification requirement that you do RECAP. I'm hesitant to give those out, but MARR is willing to do that if there are circumstances where you simply don't have any staff to do it. But other than that,
Some level 2s as well.
yeah. But before you make that decision, I'd love to actually sit down and talk to you about what I see as the potential, maybe bringing in Dr. Greco or Anthony or somebody to talk about what their experiences were too.
Yeah, and I gotta just say, from a ethical, spiritual perspective, if I didn't believe, Jason, that the act of actually going through the assessment with the client is in and of itself an intervention and helps them in their recovery, I wouldn't be here. Right. And so that was the thing that gravitated me most to this research that Dr. Best had developed, and the work that John and Jessica were doing together, was me watching and seeing that the act of doing this itself was beneficial to someone in their recovery. So much so that I want our whole team going through a RECAP, right? I've said this, for each of us going through it, right? Because I think at any stage in our life and our recovery, going through these questions and monitoring and having some goals for ourselves is a valuable intervention, a valuable tool, right? And so I firmly believe that and get behind it, that this is beneficial to the program, to the client, and it's a service added, right? A benefit added to the person going through the process.
In my prior life, I was an accountant, so I fully understand and embrace the idea that numbers can paint a very powerful picture. But for my limited understanding, I can see how this is very helpful for people that are there for 6 months going to 2 years, because now you see a trend, you see a complete picture. But what about the significant population that views what we do as more of a stepping stone? It's not really for their housing, but they want it for 1 to 3 months to kind of start using the tools they learn, but then they've already planned on moving on. And it seems like, well, what do we do with that information if it's so limited and we can't get the full clear trend of a picture?
I gotta talk to this for a second, Preston, because in my life leading up to Get Help, what I did for, what I was really interested in was doing assessments, clinical assessments in particular, often forensic assessments, right? Determining whether people were competent to stand trial. And more often than not, a lot of the assessment had addiction in the background, trauma and everything. And sometimes I would only get an hour or an hour and a half to spend with a client, right, that was incarcerated or whatever. And I looked at all of those questions, all the work we did in and of itself was the intervention, right? That gave me 1 hour to be able to plant some seeds for that individual, regardless of where they went from there. And that's the way I view this, right? Is that even if you only got that 1 hour to spend with that individual and they left the next day, that may be the most powerful hour that they're going to get, right? Of planting seeds of what it is that they can be doing if or when they're ready, or at the next phase of their journey, or wherever it is they go down the line. So I wouldn't view it as, in fact, not a waste of time, but the most maybe beneficial part of their time, their limited amount of time. And that's the way that I frame it, Preston.
What
Yeah.
if you, those individuals that come and go after a month or 2 months, once they're in the system, they stay in the system. So maybe 6 months down the road, that person's going to show up again at another recovery residence that's doing rec cap. He's going to be in that system and they're going to be able to see, oh, well, he's got this pattern that's why he keeps leaving every 2 to 3 months, so they know they can put different resources in place to maybe help his journey be a little bit longer, and give more recovery capital support. So it doesn't really matter how long they stay.
Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, sorry, Matthew. How exciting is that to be able to then engage with that individual and say, well, this is the goal you had set, or this was what you talked about 3 months ago. What's different? What are we going to do different this time? Justin, or then Matthew, sorry.
Yeah, Preston, just
diving in.
A quick comment on that. In the VAR network, the greatest jump in recovery capital growth happens in that first 45 days. So when we look at our data and see the linear growth of recovery capital, we see the largest jump in that first 45 days. So we know there's a lot of support that's going on in this first 45 days. So whether you're staying, 45, 60, 6 months, 9 months, every part of that picture is important. So there's a lot happening in those first 60 days that's very valuable, to this process and painting the picture of what happens in recovery residences and the support therein.
Yeah, and Preston, what I would say also is that you heard John talk about the intensive support programs here at VAR. Some of our providers have these level 3 intensive support programs that last about 28 days. They're not clinical or treatment based, they're recovery based and peer based. But what the data shows that Dr. Best reviewed was that clients that went through this intervention and the different supports associated with it, that by the next 45-day evaluation, within 45 days, that they had closed the gap, because people to qualify for that have to have significant barriers to recovery and a significantly reduced RCI index score. And so those people closed the gap, which means that those intensive support providers, even if it's just for a 28-day time period, the organizations that deliver that program can see where they're getting it right and where they can improve upon. And then they can see common trends in people who they don't retain for the entire 28 days. So there's so much data and knowledge for you to gain about your program just in that time period.
One other issue, Preston, is last week in Lansing, Dr. Best and Jessica talked about putting in proposals for rec cap used in a recovery community organization or recovery community center. And that funding is also going to be coming down in the next, I'll say 30 days, if not sooner. And so let's say you got somebody that's in a recovery residence for a month or two and says, I'm leaving, but I'm going to generally stay in the area somewhere. And yeah, I need some help on my recovery. That person can go seek to be registered with a recovery community center. And that recovery community center will have their own peer navigator, rec cap coach, will be able to take all the data from whatever you got on day one to the current day for them to say, okay, we'll just continue on with serving the client.
Yeah, I would even go a step further on that, and we'll see how it all unfolds in Michigan. But what is happening in Virginia is the RCOs who are funded with their own data, with their own funding stream to hire, train, and employ certified peer navigators that are familiar with the system and the platform, et cetera. They're delivering service to a resident in a level 2 recovery residence that has the same bandwidth challenge that you were describing to us. Hey, I think it's a great idea. I'd like all my residents to be able to take advantage of it. Problem is that I don't have the time or the effort or the bandwidth to go hire somebody to do it. Well, you don't need to. You can assign them to, if they want to participate, they can enroll for free over at the RCO, and the navigator over there can fulfill the navigation role, and you have visibility to all the data and the outcomes that are produced, and you have input, but you're not responsible for delivering the service.
We've already talked, I was listening to you when you mentioned that, John, like 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
And so we've already talked about that. And I, in areas like northern Michigan, where there might be geographically some distance between some limited recovery residences, one of the things that my thought was, okay, we'll have a recovery community center that'll have peer navigators there that can service all of the, gee, you gotta go over to the county next door because they've only got one 6-person home in that one. So I see that as another node for delivery of the rec cab service throughout Michigan, and probably more in the rural areas than in the more urban areas. But Preston, that's your next job. Start a recovery community organization in Grand Rapids, okay?
Justin?
My goal is to help the operators as much as I can. I really think it's so important that everyone get behind RECAP. And if we can somehow try to simplify things as much as possible to make sure everybody is capable of doing this, so you can see results. That's my goal. I really hope that everybody will give this an effort. And we're out of time, way over time. We did it again. So there were several things we were going to talk about real quick.
Can we have Justin? Has had his hand up for a while.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, just real quick, I really appreciate what Jason had to say with regards to the funding dollars, the SOR dollars that, because about a year and a half ago, I was getting the same thing funded through our local region here. And what happened is that when they allowed a certain amount of residents to be funded, and we as operators, we picked and chose who that was to get the funding. They were all obviously our current residents and stuff like that. But what we found is that when the person that came in brand new, fresh out of a $20,000 stay that the region funded it to begin with, they came into the recovery house, okay, and they agreed to do these certain simple things, coming in the door, but then they were funded. What happened was, what we found is that while I'm funded, I don't necessarily need to do anything. I don't need to get a job, and I don't need to be responsible. So what all of a sudden what happened is that some of the cable bills started really getting really high. See the correlation there? Yeah, because everyone was sitting on their gaming, and it was just like, whoa. And so so like my thought process is, I don't know, we're not talking about direct funds or anything like that kind of stuff, but why don't, instead of like, giving more handouts to people that are already, in that realm, so to speak, because basically the truth of the matter is if an addict uses, all they gotta do is call access and the regional fund them to get into treatment, and then for free, and then they come to the recovery house and they get funded for free again. So if they go out and use or drink again, it doesn't really matter, because all they gotta do is like start the process over, right? So why don't, my theory on this is my thought process, and why don't we incentivize the people that actually, prove to be in recovery? Right. So why don't we start the funding when they have 4 months or 6 months, right? And so that way they're in a spot now where they're already in the 8 and 9 making amends, right? And they can save money and put that money towards their when they get their own place or their own apartment. And so listen, I'm in the trenches on the firing line. I deal with these shenanigans all the day, and like Jason, I'm so grateful that you said that, because I turned down the very next, when they came up next time for me to get those SOAR $2, they wanted me to do all these different shenanigans, and they wanted to basically come in, run how we do things here. And I'm like, oh no, thank you. We appreciate that. But that's not how this is going to go, and even the lady at the Region 10, she called me and said, Justin, I really appreciate what you did there. She's like, you know, you seem like you have a model that's working, and you know, and so like, what, just keep doing that. And that's from a person who isn't even in recovery, that just worked at the region, called me and said that. And so that's why we don't accept any funding right now either. I'm on the same board as Jason, and I don't want to have to like modify what we do here, you know, because listen, we don't have the best model, we don't have staggering results by any stretch, but what we do, you know, we try to do the best we can. In the bottom line is that, like, I don't want to have some entities hovering over me and saying, listen, this is how you ought to do it, even though we've been in business for 16 years. We're going to come in and change this, right? We're going to show you how this really works, right? For people who have never been in recovery, never been on shooting dope and smoking crack and any of that kind of stuff. And they're going to come in. And so, like, that's what we felt like here, is that, like, the region was going to try to come in and say, this is how you're going to do it. You're going to fund only brand new people that have just got a $20,000 fund, you know, to go to rehab. You're going to fund them now. Right. And then like, that's the people that are going to get funded. So basically they can come into the recovery house and chill out. Right. And so, like, we're not having it. We're not. And so, like, that's kind of my.
Justin,
yeah.
You and I already had a long conversation about this. It was because most of the people that come in don't have employment. They don't, you know, so it's a way so for you to help cover your costs and stuff while this person's going out looking for employment until he gets that first paycheck, you know, and then he can start paying. That's going to help you as an operator. Think of all the guys, hundreds of people that have come through your doors promising to pay and didn't pay. So that's why funding the individuals when they first come in, that's why that's in place. It's to help you as an operator so you're not losing money. So we
And
got off track a little bit.
Justin, if y'all have a region that's paying for everybody to go to $20,000 treatment, let me know, because that doesn't exist in Virginia. I'm going to get a plane and I'm going to send all of our relapsers out of recovery houses up to y'all, because I'm going to tell you what a gift and a miracle. Typically here, you know, we see a lot of our criminal justice involved individuals get the most funding from our providers. We don't tell them who to use it on, but organically it's people who families have given up on them, right? You know, third, fourth, fifth time being incarcerated, they're coming out and going into a recovery house. And most of them seem to be pretty eager to kind of get their life back on track. But again, right, it takes a while. They got to get IDs again, and, you know, all these different barriers to even get employment. And so I think to Catherine's point, like, you know, that's who we see a lot of our providers decide to use the funding on. And sometimes the providers do use the funding on people who've been there a while, right? You may have somebody who's been there for 6 months and maybe is in the construction business, right? And they want to kind of start their life over again and get into maybe recovery support service or being a peer, right? But they got to take time off. They got to not have a job for a period of time. Like, you could use that funding on them individuals, on those, right? Those who are trying to take another step in their life. So, you know, we feel as MARR here in Virginia, it's very important to let our providers decide those sorts of scenarios on funding.
Yeah, it's different here depending on what area you're in. Every region has their own stipulations and stuff, so.
Well, and speaking to that too, a very good point is maybe something that Jeff can touch base on. While David and I were in Michigan and meeting with Angie and her team, one of the things we wanted to discuss were your regional, you know, PIHP providers that I'm learning lots about. Nailed it this time? Good. I always invert those. So I understand that they have a monthly call, I believe, and we will be presenting to them and start to have a discussion about eliminating some of those burdens that you currently experience in their area, and being able to pull reports directly from the ARM system, hopefully, to be able to feed into them so that there is no extra reporting or any extra burden on you. That's our next goal, is to start those discussions with your regions.
Just so you know, Justin, I've talked to the PIHP people in person and virtually more than a half a dozen times in the last couple of years. And it's been a consistent request that they standardize the rates, because it's different in all 10 of our PIHPs. Some will pay as low as 14, some will pay 28, some will pay something if they combine it. But those PIHPs have their own individual fiefdoms, and they make up their own rules. And so far I've been unsuccessful in getting any type of uniformity. There are some areas of the state of Michigan where it's pro-recovery residents, and there are others that are not so much. But we're continuing to work on that. MARR is not the state of Michigan. We're a private nonprofit. So we don't write out any of the checks. We just ask for the money and then give it to the recovery residence operators, try to do some certification and training and registry.
And so we'll hopefully be able to create that uniform process, and you won't need to deal with them directly, as Anthony pointed out, I believe earlier. You don't contract with the state, so you're not getting funding directly from them. The point is that there is this interim person, this agent, if you will, that's working on your behalf to go up and to have those conversations with the state. So they aren't mandating anything on your, for you guys. This is about collecting the measure, plan, engage process inside of the ARM system in a uniformed way, in a very structured, evidence-based way.
Justin, if you have an issue about that, drop me an email and I'm happy, because we're going to be talking to all the PIHP people with the state agency ladies the 4th Friday in January, and then probably the 4th Friday in every other month after that. So if anybody's got any complaints about things aren't working well with your PIHPs for whatever reason, please send it to MARR. Give me that information. I've used that, by the way, with our RCOs to be able to show you're creating barriers to the state of Michigan, and those barriers were successfully eliminated last Wednesday. But it's like, if I don't know about them, I can't even ask the state of Michigan for relief. So literally, if anybody has an issue as an operator with any of their PIHP's funding, send it to me. I can use that on your behalf to argue for you.
Thank you very much. And I think we should definitely discuss next steps, unless there was any other agenda items, Catherine, that you needed to go through.
That's it.
Okay, so for those of you who have already put inside of the chats or raised your hands, or we've seen in previous meetings that we're already beginning the process with, if there's anybody else who is ready to begin, do we want to send a message over to Kelly and to acknowledge that we would like to have further discussions and to begin this process? We can start to move forward with the next steps. That would be greatly appreciated. And I think we have a number of you so far, so that is a very good news. Thank you very much. And any other final thoughts?
First, I want to thank the operators who I know a lot of people have logged off already. Have a Merry Christmas and a happy holiday. And please feel free to reach out to MARR with any questions or concerns if you can't stick around for this portion. But thank you for all you do. Appreciate it.
Merry Christmas. Thanks
Merry
for
Christmas.
Virginia, and get help for being here. And we'll see where after
Thank
the
you
big
all.
storm. Hope everybody
very
gets through the big
much.
storm on the weekend. All right. Stay safe.
More.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.